Listen, what happened on Monday Night Raw wasn't just shocking. It was absolutely disgusting. And if you're not furious about this, you haven't been paying attention. Brock Lesnar, the so-called beast incarnate, walked into that arena and decided he was above every single rule, every regulation, and every ounce of respect that professional wrestling is built on. He handcuffed human beings. He handcuffed grown men and women like they were animals, like they were prisoners, like they had no rights whatsoever. And you know what the worst part is? Management let it happen. They stood there, watched it unfold, and did absolutely nothing to stop this madness. If this happened in your workplace, there would be lawsuits, there would be arrests. There would be criminal charges filed faster than you could blink. But because it's Brock Lesnar, because he's the golden boy who brings in ratings, suddenly it's just entertainment. Suddenly it's just part of the show. That's complete garbage, and we need to talk about why this crossed every line imaginable and why the wrestling world should be in absolute uproar right now. The entire locker room was rendered helpless. Think about that for a second. Every wrestler who works their tail off night after night, who sacrifices their bodies, their families, their health for our entertainment, was treated like they were worthless. Seth Rollins, the man who's carried this company on his back for years, handcuffed like a common criminal. Cody Rhodes, the American nightmare who left everything behind to come back and finish his story. Restrained and humiliated in front of the world. Even legends who've earned their stripes through decades of blood, sweat, and tears were treated like they were nothing more than props in Brock's twisted power fantasy. This wasn't a wrestling angle. This was psychological warfare. This was Brock Lesnar sending a message that he owns Monday Night Raw, that he owns WWE, and that nobody, absolutely nobody, can touch him. The arrogance, the sheer audacity of walking into that building and thinking you can just assault people, restrain them against their will, and face zero consequences is mind-blowing. We're supposed to believe this is okay. We're supposed to just accept that one man can terrorize an entire roster and it's brushed off as compelling television. What kind of message does that send to everyone watching at home? And before anyone types in the comments that this is all scripted and I'm being worked, let me stop you right there because I'm tired of hearing that excuse. Yes, wrestling is predetermined. Yes, these are storylines written by a team of creative writers. But the message this sends is dangerous and irresponsible on multiple levels. When you show millions of impressionable fans around the world that someone can physically dominate others through intimidation and restraint without repercussions, what exactly are you teaching? That might makes right. That if you're big enough and scary enough, you can do whatever you want to whoever you want. The optics alone are horrendous and frankly embarrassing. WWE has spent years, literal years, trying to clean up its image, trying to be more corporate friendly, trying to appeal to major sponsors and mainstream audiences who write the checks that keep this company running. And then they put on a segment where their biggest star is literally handcuffing people, backstage, like some kind of deranged prison guard or authoritarian dictator. Make it make sense because I genuinely cannot wrap my head around the thought process that led to this getting approved. Let's talk about the actual sequence of events. Because it gets exponentially worse the more you break it down and analyze what actually transpired. Brock didn't just handcuff one or two people and call it a night like some quick backstage attack. No, he went on an absolute rampage that lasted throughout the entire show. He systematically went through the locker room like he was checking off names on a hit list, targeting anyone who might pose a threat, anyone who might stand up to him, anyone who might interfere with whatever twisted agenda he's pushing this time. Reports from people backstage say he had help, that there were accomplices involved, that this was premeditated and organized down to the last detail. So not only do we have one monster running wild through the arena, we have an entire faction or group enabling this behavior and actively participating in the assault. Where's the babyface locker room unity we've seen in the past? Where are the heroes banding together to stop this tyranny like they did against the Authority or the Bloodline? Instead, everyone was picked off one by one, like this was a horror movie or some kind of slasher film. It was systematic brutality disguised as sports entertainment, and it was genuinely difficult to watch. The imagery alone was disturbing on a level that transcends normal wrestling violence. Grown adults with their hands literally bound behind their backs, unable to defend themselves, unable to fight back, unable to even shield their faces from further attacks, forced to watch helplessly as Brock continued his vicious assault on their colleagues and friends. Some were left handcuffed to railings in the hallways, some to production equipment and storage crates, some just left sprawled out on the cold concrete floor, like discarded trash that nobody cared about. The humiliation wasn't just physical, it was emotional and mental torture. These are performers who pride themselves on their toughness, their resilience, their ability to overcome any obstacle thrown their way. And they were reduced to helpless victims in a matter of minutes. And for what purpose? To make Brock look strong, to set up some payoff match down the line where he finally gets his comeuppance that we all know probably won't even happen. The cost of this storytelling is way too high, and the damage to everyone's credibility might be irreparable. What's absolutely infuriating is that we creative clearly thought this was genius television. They probably sat in that writer's room at headquarters, pitched this idea with great enthusiasm, and patted themselves on the back for being so edgy and provocative and bound. But there's a massive difference between being provocative and being offensive. There's a difference between creating compelling drama that keeps people talking and creating content that makes viewers genuinely uncomfortable for all the wrong reasons. Wrestling is supposed to be larger than life, yes, but it's also supposed to have some semblance of internal logic and consequences for actions. When you create a scenario where one person can single-handedly dismantle an entire roster of supposedly elite athletes with no immediate repercussions whatsoever, you've broken the suspension of disbelief that makes wrestling work. You've made everyone else look weak, incompetent, foolish, and completely incapable of protecting themselves or each other. And let's address the massive elephant in the room that nobody in WWE seems willing to acknowledge. Brock Lesnar's booking has been problematic for years, arguably since he returned to the company over a decade ago. He's been consistently portrayed as this unstoppable force who shows up whenever he feels like it, demands whatever he wants, and gets it immediately because management is absolutely terrified of losing him to another promotion or back to UFC. He's held championships hostage with his part-time schedule. He's SO'd events that fans paid good money to attend. He's been given preferential treatment that no other wrestler on the entire roster receives, regardless of their status or drawing power. And now, this. Now he's literally restraining people and physically preventing them from doing their jobs. And we're supposed to just go along with it because he's Brock Lesnar and the rules apparently don't apply to him. The double standard is glaring and impossible to ignore. If any other wrestler pulled this kind of stunt, even within the context of a storyline, they'd be suspended immediately, fined heavily, or written off television for months. But Brock gets to be the exception to every single rule in the book. And it's exhausting for everyone who cares about consistent storytelling. The locker room, morale must be at an all-time low right now, and I genuinely feel bad for everyone involved. Imagine being a wrestler who's been grinding for years, working every house show, every television taping, every international tour, putting your body on the line night after night in front of crowds big and small, and then watching as one part-timer who works maybe 20 dates a year comes in and makes you look like an absolute chump who can't defend yourself. How are you supposed to take yourself seriously as a competitor after that kind of humiliation? How are fans supposed to take you seriously when you couldn't even prevent yourself from being handcuffed by one man? The answer is, they won't, and that's the tragedy here. This segment damaged the credibility of every single person involved, from main eventers to mid-carders to everyone in between. And it's going to take months, maybe even years of careful rebuilding to restore that trust and believability with the audience. What makes this even more ridiculous and harder to accept is the complete lack of logical follow-through in the narrative. Where were the police? Where was arena security? Where was WWE's own security team that we see every single week? In what universe does someone assault and falsely imprison dozens of people without law enforcement getting immediately involved? I know wrestling exists in its own heightened reality, but there have to be some boundaries and rules that govern that reality. You can't just handcuff an entire locker room and have absolutely zero legal ramifications or consequences. It destroys the believability of the entire product and makes it impossible for intelligent viewers to suspend their disbelief. If we're supposed to buy into this world and invest emotionally in what happens, then the rules of that world need to be consistent and make sense. You can't just pick and choose when real-world logic applies, based on what's convenient for the storyline at any given moment. The fans in attendance didn't know how to react. And honestly, who could blame them for being confused? Some were cheering because Brock is entertaining in a car crash sort of way and they appreciate his dominance. Others were sitting in stunned silence, probably wondering if they should be enjoying what they were watching or if they should feel bad about the uncomfortable imagery. And you know what? That confusion is exactly what's wrong with this entire angle. Good wrestling storytelling makes you feel something definitive and clear. You should be cheering passionately for the hero or booing loudly for the villain with conviction and emotional investment. This just left everyone bewildered and uncomfortable, which isn't the goal, unless you're deliberately trying to turn fans away from the product, which would be completely counterproductive from a business standpoint. Social media absolutely exploded after this aired, and rightfully so because people were genuinely upset. Twitter was on fire, Reddit was full of angry threads. YouTube was flooded with reaction videos, and wrestling journalists were scrambling to provide context and analysis. People were asking legitimate questions about the direction of the company, about the message being sent to viewers, about whether this kind of content is appropriate in today's social climate, where we're supposed to be more conscious and thoughtful. We live in a world where mental health, workplace safety, personal boundaries, and consent are taken more seriously than ever before. And then WWE airs a segment that seemingly trivializes all of those important issues. The backlash was swift, widespread, and completely justified. Yet there's been radio silence from the company. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that maybe they crossed a line or misjudged how this would be received. Just business as usual, like nothing controversial happened. If this is the direction Monday Night Raw is heading for the foreseeable future, count me extremely worried about the state of the product. Wrestling is at its absolute best when it's telling compelling human stories with real stakes that matter and characters you can invest in emotionally over the long term. This wasn't that by any stretch of the imagination. This was shock value for the sake of shock value. And it's lazy storytelling that relies on cheap heat instead of genuine character work. Instead of building legitimate heat through well-crafted promos, competitive matches, and organic character development that happens over weeks and months, they took the shortcut of having Brock physically dominate everyone in the most literal and brutal way possible. It's cheap, it's exploitative, and it's beneath what this company is capable of producing when they actually try. So what happens next week and beyond? Does everyone just forget they were handcuffed and humiliated on live television? Do they come back next Monday and pretend it never happened, like it was just another day at the office? Or do we get weeks upon weeks of revenge storylines that ultimately go nowhere because Brock will just dominate again and reassert his superiority? The pattern is predictable and tiresome for anyone who's been watching long enough. WWE has a terrible habit of creating these massive shocking moments without thinking through the long-term implications or planning how to pay them off. They want the viral clip, the Twitter trending topic, the immediate reaction and buzz, but they rarely stick the landing when it comes to delivering a payoff that feels earned and satisfying. For viewers who stayed invested, this whole situation is a perfect example of everything that frustrates longtime wrestling fans who've been watching for decades. We want to love this product with all our hearts. We want to be invested in these stories and characters. But when the company repeatedly insults our intelligence with illogical booking decisions and offensive content that crosses boundaries, it becomes harder and harder to stay engaged and keep watching. The talent deserves so much better than this. The fans who spend their hard-earned money on tickets and merchandise deserve better. And honestly, even Brock Lesnar deserves better than being written as a one-dimensional bully who needs to handcuff defenseless people to look credible and threatening. Comment below and let me know if you think I'm overreacting, or if WWE genuinely messed up here, because I desperately want to hear your take on this absolute disaster of a segment and what you think should happen moving forward.